The studio lights were warm, almost comforting, casting a soft glow that usually made conversations feel lighter than they really were. That morning, the set buzzed with the familiar energy of live television, producers murmuring into headsets, cameras gliding smoothly along their tracks, the audience settling into their seats with coffee cups and quiet chatter. Reba McEntire sat poised at the table, her posture relaxed, hands folded neatly, the kind of calm that comes from decades under brighter lights and harsher scrutiny. She smiled as she always did, a smile that carried kindness but also experience, the unspoken message of someone who had seen trends rise and fall and learned when to speak and when to wait. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair, flipping through her notes with practiced ease. The segment had begun innocently enough, stories about comedy, culture, and how humor changes with the times. Reba spoke thoughtfully, choosing her words with care, recalling moments from her career when jokes were gentler, when disagreements stayed personal rather than performative. The audience nodded along, some smiling, some murmuring in agreement. At first, Joy responded with humor, tossing out quips that earned laughter, the rhythm of the show flowing exactly as producers liked it. But then the tone shifted. Joy's jokes sharpened, her voice edging toward impatience as she waved off Reba's comments as old-fashioned. "Times move on," Joy said, shrugging, her smile tight. "You can't expect everyone to stay comfortable just because it feels nice." A ripple of laughter followed, thinner this time, tinged with uncertainty. Reba's smile remained, but her eyes changed, focused, attentive, no longer simply listening but weighing every word. She responded gently, speaking about respect, about how humor didn't have to leave people behind to move forward. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the cadence of someone used to commanding a room without demanding it. For a moment, it seemed the tension might ease. But Joy interrupted, laughing lightly as if to soften the cut. "Oh, come on," she said, leaning forward. "You're being a little sensitive, don't you think?" The audience shifted in their seats. Reba paused, not the awkward pause of someone searching for words, but the deliberate stillness of someone deciding how much truth the room was ready to hear. She nodded once, as if acknowledging Joy's point, then opened her mouth to respond. Before she could finish, Joy spoke again, louder now, layering humor over dismissal. "I mean, not everyone can be protected all the time," she added, rolling her eyes just enough for the cameras to catch it. That was when the temperature in the studio changed. Reba's smile faded, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that made it unmistakable. She drew a breath, slow and controlled, the kind singers take before a powerful note. The chatter in the audience died down as if someone had lowered an invisible volume knob. Reba placed her hand flat on the table, grounding herself, and looked directly at Joy. "I've listened respectfully," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Joy laughed reflexively, about to cut in again, but Reba lifted her hand. It wasn't aggressive or dismissive, just a simple gesture, palms slightly raised. "No," she said gently, but firmly. "Let me finish." The room froze. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, operators instinctively tightening their shots. The audience fell silent, every eye fixed on the exchange. Reba continued, speaking slowly, deliberately, each word landing with weight. She talked about conversations she'd had off camera, about fans who felt unheard, about the difference between challenging ideas and belittling people. She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Joy shifted in her seat, her expression flickering between surprise and defensiveness. She tried to smile, tried to lighten the moment with a joke, but the timing was gone. Reba's calm had filled the space completely, leaving no room for interruption. The audience began to clap, tentatively at first, then louder, the sound swelling until it echoed through the studio. Producers exchanged glances behind the scenes. Reba kept speaking through the applause, not basking in it, not feeding on it. She spoke about respect, about listening even when it was uncomfortable, about how disagreement could exist without contempt. Her words weren't rehearsed, but they carried the polish of truth spoken often and lived deeply. She glanced briefly toward the audience, acknowledging them with a small nod, then returned her gaze to Joy. "And when a conversation stops being about understanding," Reba said, her voice still even, "that's when it stops being funny." The applause grew louder, some audience members rising to their feet. Joy attempted to interject again, this time more carefully, but Reba held the floor with nothing more than her presence. There was no anger in her expression, only resolve. The kind that doesn't seek to win an argument, but to end it. For a moment, live television forgot itself. The usual rhythm, the jokes, the interruptions, the quick transitions, fell away. What remained was a quiet reckoning unfolding in real time, witnessed by millions. Reba finished her thought, folded her hands once more, and fell silent. The studio erupted, applause crashing like a wave, and even those who disagreed couldn't deny the power of what they had just seen. The clash hadn't exploded yet, but everyone could feel it coming. Later that day, the moment replayed everywhere, but inside the studio it had unfolded with a gravity that clips could never fully capture. After the applause finally faded, there was an odd silence, the kind that lingers when something unscripted has taken control of a carefully managed space. Joy cleared her throat, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground, her tone lighter, almost joking, as if humor could rewind what had just happened. "Well," she said with a half-smile, "that was passionate." A few nervous laughs bubbled up from the audience, but they fell flat, dissolving before they could gather momentum. Reba didn't smile this time. She nodded politely, the way one does at the end of a conversation that has already said everything it needed to say. "Passion comes from caring," she replied simply. "And caring means listening." Her voice remained even, but the words carried a finality that made it clear she wasn't interested in continuing the exchange for entertainment's sake. Behind the cameras, producers whispered urgently, debating whether to cut to commercial or let the moment breathe. Live television rarely allows space for reflection, but no one quite knew how to rush past this without making it worse. Joy tried again, this time more cautiously, framing her response as a clarification rather than a challenge. "I think we all respect each other here," she said, gesturing broadly, "even when we disagree." Reba met her gaze, not confrontational, just steady. "Respect isn't something you say," she answered. "It's something you show." The audience responded instantly, applause remembering its strength and surging again. This time, people stood without hesitation. Some clapped above their heads, others pressed hands to their chests, as if acknowledging something personal had been spoken aloud. Joy leaned back, lips pressed together, eyes darting briefly toward the camera. For the first time, she looked unsure, not angry, not mocking, but caught in a moment she hadn't anticipated. The usual armor of sarcasm didn't fit here. She offered a small nod, conceding ground without explicitly saying so, and the host beside her attempted to move things along. "Well," the co-host said brightly, "we're going to take a short break." Reba gently shook her head. "Before we do," she said, rising from her chair with an unhurried grace, "I just want to say this." The room stilled once more. She rested her hands at her sides, shoulders relaxed, voice carrying easily without effort. "We can laugh together. We can argue. We can even strongly disagree. But the moment we stop seeing each other as people, that's when I step away." She paused, letting the words settle. "That's enough," Reba said, not loudly, not angrily, but with a clarity that cut through every lingering echo. She offered a polite smile to the table, thanked the hosts for having her, and turned toward the exit. The audience erupted, applause thunderous now, mixed with cheers that rose like a wave following her path. Camera operators instinctively followed her, then hesitated, unsure whether they were allowed to capture this unscripted departure. In the control room, a producer finally called for commercial, but by then the moment had already etched itself into live television history. Backstage, Reba walked calmly, greeting crew members with nods and quiet thank yous. There was no storming off, no slammed doors. Just dignity. A young assistant caught up to her, eyes wide, whispering, "That was incredible." Reba smiled softly. "It was necessary," she replied, and continued down the hallway. Within minutes, social media ignited. Clips flooded timelines, slowed down, zoomed in, captioned with bold text and exclamation points. Some called it explosive, others called it overdue. Fans praised her composure, her refusal to trade respect for ratings. Even critics who disagreed with her perspective admitted there was something powerful about the way she held her ground without raising her voice. Joy, meanwhile, remained at the table when the show returned from break, her expression carefully neutral. She addressed the audience briefly, acknowledging that live television could bring out strong feelings and that conversations like these mattered. It was a measured response, but viewers could see the shift. The dynamic had changed. The noise had been interrupted. By evening, headlines multiplied, each one louder than the last. But amid the shouting, a quieter narrative took hold. Commentators replayed the clip not for the clash, but for the calm. They analyzed Reba's pauses, her choice of words, the way she waited to speak until the room was ready to listen. Psychologists weighed in on the power of controlled emotion. Media veterans pointed out how rare it was to see someone reclaim space without demanding it. Reba herself stayed offline. She spent the evening with close friends, laughing softly, the kind of laughter that releases tension rather than feeds it. When asked later about the incident, she didn't frame it as a victory. "I didn't shut anyone down," she said in a quiet interview days later. "I just stood up for how I believe conversations should be." Joy addressed it too, eventually, admitting that live exchanges could go further than intended. She didn't apologize outright, but she acknowledged the moment had struck a chord. "People are tired," she said. "And maybe they're tired of not being heard." That, more than anything, became the legacy of the clash. Not the interruption, not the applause, but the reminder that sometimes the most explosive thing you can do on live television is stop playing the game altogether. Weeks later, the clip still circulated, resurfacing whenever debates grew heated. People shared it as a reference point, a pause button in an endless loop of noise. And every time Reba's calm voice cut through the chaos, the message landed again, clear, steady, and impossible to ignore.